It's astonishing to watch how the US and Israel, powerful military giants, have suddenly chosen to back off and let a fragile peace take hold. After unleashing bunker-buster bombs deep into Iran's underground facilities and launching waves of F-35 strikes, cyber attacks and assassinations aimed at crippling Khamenei's regime, the hawkish momentum seemed unstoppable. Yet just when things looked closest to full-scale war, Trump announced a complete and total ceasefire.
A day before this war started, there were meetings between U.S. and Qatari officials about the possibility of the U.S. joining this war. And those contacts continued all along the last 3 days. And today, when after the Iranian attack on the El Udeid base, Iranian officials sent a message to the White House through the Qataris saying, we're done. This is our response. We're not going to do anything further. The White House sent a message back through the Qataris. We are not, if you're done, we are not going to retaliate, and we want to talk. We want to now get a deal. In the hours since then, there were talks between the US and Israel and Qatar and Iran to tie the final knots and agree on the final conditions of this ceasefire.
Even before any official confirmation from Israel or Iran had come through. That pivot signals not just caution, but a strategic retreat by Washington and Tel Aviv, bowing under regional pressure and global economic anxiety.
בוקר טוב. אמש קיימתי דיון ביטחוני בהשתתפות שר הביטחון, ראשי הסיעות, בכירי מערכת הביטחון.
From what I've seen, there's a mix of skepticism, criticism, and some outright calling out of the ceasefire narrative, especially when it comes to the ceasefire. Some posts I found on X suggest that a lot of folks aren't buying the idea that this ceasefire was a straightforward diplomatic win, and there's a sense that the whole thing might have been more about optics or strategy than genuine peace. One post from All Yoran on Central, for instance, throws some serious shade. Israel announced its proposal for a ceasefire with Iran less than 12 hours ago. Trump now taking credit for it. The result of the US-Israeli op, an Iran regime with a stronger grip to power, nuclear material hidden, increased funding for militias, mission accomplished. This suggests that some users see Trump's involvement as more about claiming a political victory than achieving real progress. The implication here is that the ceasefire might actually be strengthening Iran's position, which could be a point of contention for those opposing it. Then there's another angle from Aziz Squirrel, who's calling out the whole setup as a ruse. Breaking, the Israelis are now openly admitting that all the Trump negotiations to get a deal with Iran, Trump's turn on Netanyahu, Trump told Israel to not attack Iran, was deliberate false propaganda to lull Iran into a false sense of security, exactly as I said it was. This post is straight up saying that the ceasefire talk was a smokescreen, possibly to catch Iran off guard. If true, that'd definitely fuel opposition from people who see this as manipulative rather than diplomatic.
It's bad, or because, you've wasted your time at university. As the kind of people who write headlines like "stick it up your bunker" would have you believe, even as they privately acknowledge the opposite to be true, it's because there is no rationale, there's no ideology, there's no tactic, there's no point to it except self-interest. And if it is as simple as Theo describes it, then the self-interest is a sort of watered-down version of Benjamin Netanyahu's. Benjamin Netanyahu attacks Iran because it keeps him out of jail. Donald Trump attacks Iran because it distracts the US public from the consequences of his economic policies and his failed deportations. Okay, here's a question. The Columbia University graduate who was a massive cause célèbre in the early days of the administration. He was arrested for opinions expressed on campus at Columbia University, support for the Palestinian people. He was released this weekend. How mad do I sound when I wonder whether Donald Trump would have done what he did if the bloke that he claimed would never be released hadn't been released this weekend? I know, I'm just saying. I'm just illustrating how hard it is to have, what would you describe them as? Sensible conversations about an insensible man. Theo, thank you. Balama is in Lambeth. Balama, twice in 2 weeks, you spoil me, Mr. Ambassador.
It's telling that markets responded almost instantly. CNP futures climbed and oil prices dipped as investors seemed to cheer the pause. Behind the scenes, Washington leveraged Qatar's mediation to push the deal through, and Trump even thanked Iran for giving early notice of missile firings on U.S. bases, calling them very weak. That doesn't look like diplomacy born of strength. It feels like choosing to step back from the edge, admitting that pushing forward would make things far worse. What's really striking is how little Iran actually gave in this so-called agreement. Their nuclear facilities remain intact, their centrifuge operations continue, and Tehran never had to openly capitulate to Israel's demands. Israel, for its part, essentially agreed to stop its relentless strikes without having secured any of its key objectives. Iran's nukes still stand, and the regime remains untouched. The whole thing reeks of a surrender in disguise, publicly framed as a peace victory, but in reality a win for Iran's resistance, achieved by grinding pressure and savvy diplomacy. Meanwhile, both the U.S. and Israel are scrambling to spin this retreat as not so much a retreat. Trump's rhetoric shifted from threats of unconditional surrender to calm talk of peace, but without specifying any real concessions. Israel's blitzkrieg appears to have stopped cold, draining stockpiles and forcing Netanyahu into diplomatic backpedals. Critics across both countries are furious. Some hawks see it as selling out Israel's security. Others fear backing down emboldens Iran's regional ambitions. It's a strange irony. The two countries, long seen as aggressive warriors, are now acting like wary negotiators, hoping this fragile calm holds without having achieved anything close to victory. In truth, the ceasefire feels bought with everything but principle. Israel halted its operation without dismantling Iran's nuclear program. The U.S. paused its air campaign without forcing meaningful inspections or disarmament. No one really won here in the conventional sense. Rather, the world exhaled because the crash didn't happen. If this is peace, it came not from power or ideology but from exhaustion and fear of economic chaos. The question now isn't whether peace is possible, but whether a deal reached under duress can last, and whether the world can afford this kind of uneasy truce masquerading as triumph. And with Trump under Israel's dictate, people like Professor Jeffrey Sachs said everybody should take the new ceasefire with a pinch of salt.
Yes, and it's so deeply embedded in the CIA and in the security agencies. Tulsi Gabbard basically, in the end, folded her hand. But I think from deep down, there are parts of the U.S. government that always say yes to Israel, period. CIA and Mossad work hand in hand. This is a high aspiration of the Israelis. They're completely out of control, by the way. And the bravado is so reckless and dangerous. One of the ministers of the Israeli government apparently posted today, next year in Tehran. Very clever regime change. What they want to show is that they can be as brazenly violent, brazenly illegal as imaginable, and no one will say boo about it. Here Israel launches a absolutely unprovoked war, and all the countries in Europe and the United States direct their warning to Iran not to escalate.
Well, Iran is the victim of two unprovoked wars, one by Israel, one by the United States.
That's the point. And if it sounds a little bit odd, that one kid punches the other in the face and everyone yells at the one punched in the face, don't retaliate. If you think it's a little ridiculous, it's meant to be ridiculous. It's meant to be a show of brazenness. We got all of this under control. Don't worry about it. Of course, they never have anything under control. Everything brings us closer and closer to complete disaster. Everything Netanyahu touches turns to rubble, honest to God. And it's happening in his own country also. But he's already brought to rubble 6 countries and now is aiming for the 7th country. And we take the orders. It's incredible how this is happening.
I want to talk about the economy, which of course is one of your fields. But before we get there, let's talk about the law. Iran, Israel, and the United States are all members of the United Nations. The United States and Iran have signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. If I recall correctly, LBJ himself personally signed it in a big fanfare in the late 60s. Israel has not signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. The IAEA, which examines Israel, turns out to be a conduit to Mossad, but yet belatedly said they're not making a nuclear weapon. What role can the United Nations, if any, play in this? Or is the answer none, because the U.S. can veto whatever the UN says?
The main role that the UN actually plays is to show the overwhelming weight of public opinion. The United Nations cannot act in general because of the veto by any one of the permanent 5 members, but the veto is used these days by the United States. But what the UN remains, no matter what the US vetoes, is the place where 193 governments meet, and typically around 180 of them say, "What the hell are you doing?" Continuing this violence in the Middle East, continuing to block a state of Palestine, not obeying international law. Of course, Israel then jumps up and down in its impunity, saying, "How dare you," and attacks the UN, and the United States duly vetoes any resolution that might actually get something done. So the UN does not have power in the sense of actually being able to determine the outcome. What it is a reflection of the world. That counts for most of the world. It doesn't count if you believe you're all powerful or you act with impunity. The United States dreams that it does. Israel dreams that it can do anything it wants, attack other countries, occupy other countries, commit genocide. No one says a word that is in a position to block Israel. And most of all, they know they have the United States at their back. One day, they'll wake up and they won't have the United States because the American people are sick of this, frankly. Donald Trump's own base is sick of this.
Yes.
This is so disgusting. This is happening, by the way, while Israel continues to starve nearly 2 million people. And again, the Europeans, who are more pathetic than I ever could have imagined, but they show their ability to grovel to an extent I wouldn't have imagined, don't say anything. The U.S. Congress, of course, is, as we know, fully bought up by the Israel lobby. But what the UN shows is normal people from all over the world are aghast, as I am, as you are.
In the United States, I doubt that this affects Trump, but it will affect the United States in the future, becoming the rogue nation that Israel has become.
I do a statistical analysis with my colleagues of looking at the extent to which countries are aligned with the UN Charter. Now, maybe in America, many people don't care about that. I do, because I think it's the way that we can survive, is if the world actually behaves according to a common standard. The United States, of the 193 UN member states, is the least aligned with the UN Charter. The least of all countries in the world. Israel is next, I think, or close to the bottom. What does that mean? Well, the U.S. doesn't vote with the rest of the world. It votes against the large majorities of the rest of the world. By the way, that's not because the rest of the world hates the U.S. Quite the contrary. They have their kids going to school here. The Trump administration won't block foreign students. They come for tourism. They like the American people. But the United States will not cooperate or abide by international law because it thinks it can do anything it wants. And it sides with this absolute destructiveness of these extremists in Israel. So the U.S. votes against the world majority. The U.S. participates least in UN treaties. Donald Trump has said, now, some viewers may disagree, but I will tell you, climate change is real, very serious, getting worse fast, very dangerous for the world. But who cares? We walked out of it. We walk out of other UN agencies. Who cares? We don't pay the bills to the UN, which are tiny, by the way, tiny. But however small, if you don't pay, you add insult to injury. That's the approach. So the U.S. actually comes out in the very bottom of the world on this. There's something which Americans haven't heard of because of the way our government behaves, but the Sustainable Development Goals. These were objectives for people to have health care and to have children in school and to have decent nutrition. Not bad, actually, that the whole world subscribed to in 2015. And governments were supposed to say to other governments, look, here's what we're doing. It's not a heavy homework assignment. It's called a voluntary national review. You know what? Of the 193 countries, 190 have done it. The United States, Haiti, maybe South Sudan still hasn't done it, but the U.S. never did it because, why do we care? So it's a kind of putting a finger to the rest of the world. So you ask me, are we a rogue country? Well, in the statistical sense of actually measuring, do we abide by any of the principles of international law, of UN processes, of votes in the UN Security Council, of votes in the UN General Assembly, of paying our bills? Yeah, we're a rogue state. And some are proud of it. There's a conference next week, which I'll be going to in Spain, on how to help mobilize financing for poor countries so that their kids can be in school and they can have electricity and roads and other things. Okay, I'm sure Donald Trump is not shedding a tear about this, but the United States formally pulled out of the conference. All the rest of the world's going.